Well, good morning Year 10 and welcome this Tuesday morning to this next video. I'm hoping this one will be a bit shorter, giving you time to read through your notes and make your own comments in an email to me. That's what I ask you to do at the end of listening to these videos, just so that I can be clear who's made the effort to listen and who hasn't. It's really important that you make your own notes and you consolidate them. If you've got any points, if you've got any reflections, if it's enhanced your learning in any way, can you please just drop me an email and let me know. If you've got any questions about the content of the video, please drop me an email and let me know too. So moving into the next theme in this series on Jekyll and Hyde, we're going to have a look today at the theme of secrecy and reputation. So let's get into it. Well, firstly then, this novel clearly deals with Jekyll and the loss of his reputation, the extent to which he goes to preserve his reputation. It's very important to him, and if you wanted to have a little quick look at the contextual details on Victorian gentlemen, we did allude to it in the lecture yesterday, but perhaps you could have a little look on your own if you were interested in that. But Jekyll isn't the only person who is concerned about his reputation in this novel. During the anecdote in chapter 1, think back to when this character, Richard Enfield, is talking to his distant kinsman, Gabriel Utterson. That phrase, distant kinsman, just meaning that they're part of the same family, but perhaps they're not brothers. They might be sort of distant cousins or relatives, that kind of thing. And he's telling Utterson the anecdote about the trampling of the small child. He starts off by saying that he was coming home from some place at the end of the world about 3 o'clock of a black winter morning. We might instantly start to sort of notice that Mr. Enfield doesn't have exactly the cleanest character. He is quite brazen. He doesn't mind admitting to Utterson that he's been up to something in the night, and if he's coming back in the middle of the night, very, very early in the morning, he obviously doesn't want anyone to know where he's been. But this is actually quite common behaviour for gentlemen in the Victorian era, for men anyway. And Enfield is quite at ease admitting this. He's not quite so at ease when Utterson and him have gossiped about Hyde. He's told his story. Utterson has said, "I want you to be absolutely sure of all the facts that you've told me about this story, because I actually know the person who is sort of closely linked to Hyde." And Enfield admits that he is ashamed of his long tongue. He says this to indicate that he's ashamed of the gossip that he's entered into, and they agree never to talk about it again. Well, this is quite a strange moment here. Why am I talking about this? Well, in regards to reputation, Enfield is ashamed because he has linked himself to this unsavoury character Hyde. He's not ashamed of his sordid experiences in the middle of the night, as the first quotation would suggest, but he's ashamed of being linked in conversation only to Hyde. Utterson again is somebody who you would expect to have the highest standards in terms of searching for the truth. His vocation, his job, he's a lawyer. He doesn't really, he sort of sets out to be this detective, hunting down. He has that humorous comment where he said, "If he be Mr. Hyde, I shall be Mr. Seek." But he doesn't maintain this truth seeker sort of characteristic throughout the whole novel. He decides halfway through that he's going to give Jekyll some wise advice. He says, "If it came to trial, your name might appear," suggesting to Jekyll that if Hyde is put on trial for the murder of Sir Danvers, Jekyll's reputation might be called into question. And this idea, this preoccupation with your name, your reputation, your whole character being tarnished in society forever, is just something that's unthinkable to these Victorian gentlemen. Perhaps Utterson here is actually quite afraid maybe that his name as being Jekyll's lawyer might be called into question as well. The last thing Utterson wants is a trial. Actually, he doesn't want to represent anyone at trial where his reputation as a lawyer is called into question. And Jekyll knows, of course, that there will be no trial. The moment he wishes, he can be rid of Hyde, and his reputation, as he assumes, is completely protected by his double identity that he's created. So Jekyll says, "I was the first that could plod in the public eye with a load of genial respectability, and in a moment, like a schoolboy, strip off these lendings and spring headlong into the sea of liberty. But for me, my impenetrable mantle, the safety was complete. Think of it, I did not even exist." So this quotation, obviously from chapter 10, it's a really handy quotation. If you wanted to pause the video and write it down, we're going to unpack some of the annotations on it now. I don't expect you to learn this enormous quotation, that would be too much, but there are certain points that you might be able to just tuck away in your memory, because it's actually this quotation works quite hard for us. It covers quite a lot of themes and motifs, quite important for our analysis on this subject. So let's get into some of these annotations. Firstly, "I was the first that could plod in the public eye with a load of genial respectability." Jekyll desperately still wants this gentlemanly reputation. This is the conflict in him. Not that he wants to be good, but he can't help being bad, but that he desperately wants his reputation intact, but at the same time he wants to sort of pursue his sort of sinful and misdeeds at the same time. That's his initial conflict that he feels here. And we thought about this similarly before, like a schoolboy. Stevenson might be making a point here that he's a little bit childish and irresponsible. He's not he wants to be a gentleman, but he also wants to be like a schoolboy as well. Again, it's that conflict between sort of being oppressed by this idea of reputation, but he also has that inward ability, like a schoolboy, to strip off this sort of oppression and just spring headlong into the sea of liberty. The metaphor here, the sea of liberty, perhaps Jekyll associates Hyde with freedom. It's a great metaphor to use there, and a really good contrast to the desolate prisoner idea that we thought about in our essays extract from chapter 7. The sea of liberty contrasted with the desolate prisoner. This is the sort of the crux of this novel. So we get this motif of clothing here, the impenetrable mantle, here referring to Jekyll, his own body of Dr. Henry Jekyll that everyone recognises, that everyone likes, apart from Lanyon, he doesn't really like him. But for Jekyll, we get the impression here that Stevenson is saying that he's got this false sense of security. Like a coat, he can put on the body of Jekyll when he needs to escape. But if you think about it, a coat that can quite easily be put on to cover something can quite easily be taken off again to expose something. And so actually the clothing motif here, although it breeds confidence in Jekyll, it's perhaps a false sense of confidence because it can quickly become undone. Finally, this quotation at the end, "Think of it, I did not even exist," I think works really hard for us. What do I mean by it works hard for us? I think it's an easy quotation to learn, and it covers a lot of themes. It covers the theme of duality, it covers the theme of reputation. He sees Hyde as a different person to himself, so it makes him feel immune. And again, building onto that topic, that theme that we thought of yesterday about religion, he blames Hyde now for everything. I did not even exist. Jekyll is not guilty. He doesn't feel like he has to face up to these consequences at all, because Hyde is going to take all the blame, meaning that Jekyll can act with impunity. He no longer thinks he's going to be held responsible for these crimes. So finally, thinking about this idea of reputation, and again just thinking about the bargain that Enfield and Utterson make at the end of chapter 1. Let us make a bargain never again to refer to this. And again, this second part of this quotation, highlighted in yellow on the screen, is quite an important quotation. It works quite hard for us. This may seem like a sort of unimportant moment, but the suggestion from Enfield never to speak of this again, it combines this idea of a bargain, showing that reputation can be lost and it can lead to financial ruin. It's a bargain for them to never speak of this again because perhaps it will leave them with their reputations intact. This is this is good because it's going to lead into our next sort of mini theme here about the theme of secrecy, because they don't decide that they're going to deal with the issue of Hyde. They just pretend that it never existed. And this idea of not really dealing with the issues, just pretending they don't exist, is almost here in this moment. It's almost like a microcosm of the macrocosm of Victorian lifestyles that were going on at the moment. There was lots and lots of unpleasant things that we're going to go on to think about now, that people didn't really deal with. They just pretended they didn't exist. So this here, Enfield saying, let us make a bargain never to refer to this again, is basically just summing up. That's like the Victorian motto, basically. Let's just pretend that these things don't exist. So what are some of these things? Well, this brings us into thinking about Victorian double standards, and this is a very interesting theme because, again, we're not just thinking about themes. These things, when I talk to you about AO2, AO1, AO3, well, we could think about AO1 as being the themes that are in the novel, but actually they're pulling apart the different contextual details as well. Think about the theme of horror. Well, it's only powerful because it taps into Victorian insecurities. Think about the theme of secrecy. Well, it's only there because Victorians had double standards, meaning there was a need for that secrecy in the first place. Hope that makes sense. If not, go back and listen to that again. There's many things that Victorians knew existed but didn't really want to think about. Things like child labour, things like poverty, and also this third little graphic there on the screen, the woman standing against the wall with a money sign hanging over her head. I tried to get one with a pound because dollars doesn't really apply to us here, but you get the idea. It's the idea of prostitution. These are things that Victorians were preferred not to think about because they were so unpleasant, but they knew they existed. They just wanted to make a bargain never to mention them. So prostitution in particular then, thinking about this, remember the point in Ian Rankin's documentary that we watched way back, I think probably in January. It seems like a long time ago now. When we watched that documentary, he talked about the city of Edinburgh having two contrasting locations. I tried to get a picture of this, but I couldn't find a clear one, showing the old town of Edinburgh and the new town. The new town was built by the wealthy people who'd done well out of the Industrial Revolution, the factory owners, the bosses, the people who were in charge of the lower class workers. So they had a lot more money, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to create this kind of separation between the working classes and them in almost like a grand gesture to show we're above these people, we don't exist alongside them, we are separate to these people. But actually, as Ian Rankin established, that was a very false sense of separation, because there were lots of tunnels, there were lots of passageways that led from the new town to the old town. And this is when the double standards come in, because prostitution here became an increasing issue. It became a growing issue, where the men who, the industrial sort of entrepreneurs, the bankers, the businessmen, had a lot more disposable income. And making use of these tunnels and these passageways, they could kind of access the old town and go and sort of, experience these sordid pleasures that Jekyll sort of refers to here in the chapter. And things are, gentlemen characters in the novel often agree not to speak about unpleasant things, perhaps so they can lie to themselves that it isn't actually happening. And the avoidance of anything unpleasant in sort of polite conversation is typical of the Victorian life and values at this time. Hope that's clear. Okay, lastly, we're going to have a look at locked doors as symbols, a very quick slide here, because we know already that this is Jekyll's house. This is a plan view of his house. The image that I've chosen, although it's a little bit blurry, clearly shows us that it's Jekyll's house and it has these different entrances. If you can't quite work out what this one says, it says the dissecting room door that Hyde uses. So firstly then, why are locked doors so important in this novel? The first thing that we think about is this dissecting room door, and it tells us a little bit about it in the first chapter. The door, which was equipped with neither bell nor locker, was blistered and disdained. Now, it doesn't have a knocker, it doesn't have a bell, because Jekyll knows that only Hyde will be using this door. He doesn't need to make the door accessible for strangers, and this ties into the theme of secrecy really, really well. There's also this idea that the windows that Jekyll was one of them that he's sitting in chapter 7, the extract that you did for your essay, the window was instantly thrust down. This idea that Jekyll, as soon as he feels that Hyde is beginning to make an appearance, rather than being exposed, he thrusts the window down and disappears into the safety of his own house. We can imagine him running into this area here, the red baize door leading to the cabinet that Jekyll occupies, where all his chemicals and potions are. That's why this section is really important. When Poole and Utterson break the door down in chapter 8, this becomes a really symbolic moment of the novel. Jekyll has kept this cabinet hidden, a really good secret all the way through. He's even equipped it with a door which is very, very sturdy, and it takes a carpenter to come and knock it down, and a locksmith as well. Those two tradesmen, it takes them all their sort of work to try and break into this when Lanyon needs potions to help Jekyll. But actually, when Utterson and Poole smash the door down, this is a symbolic moment of Jekyll's secret sort of finally being exposed. So again, just to finish off this video, we're going to look at perhaps what Stevenson's message for secrecy and reputation are. So very quickly, let's go through these. Firstly, he seems to be saying that reputations can't be trusted. They're not who you really are. They're based on appearances, and Stevenson works hard in the novel to show us that appearances can't always be trusted. They're just the version of yourself that you want to be visible to the world. And Stevenson seems to be criticising this because Jekyll's real self is only visible at night. When we come to do our video on setting and symbolism, we'll think a little bit more about why night is so important and darkness is so important in this novel as well. It's difficult to know then what is the true self, what is the authentic self. And I think built into this, Jekyll, by creating a second self, as he calls it in chapter 10, is really kind of underpinning this idea that reputations can't be trusted. And this, in my opinion, is what Stevenson is sort of trying to communicate to us through using the character of Jekyll and Hyde. Well, I hope we've enjoyed this video. It's just under 20 minutes long, so I've tried to keep this one shorter. In the next video I'm going to we're going to look at structure and narrative. That's coming up for you. If you can drop me a comment in an email just detailing any reflections that this has caused you to consider. Thank you.